In August 2025, a 21-year-old posted a car problem online that sounds fake until the numbers start lining up. He said he had financed a Mercedes, taken a major loss on it, and then rolled about $17,000 of negative equity into a new 2025 Mazda CX-70. The Mazda itself was roughly a $60,000 vehicle. By the time the old debt followed him into the new contract, he said the loan was around $80,000 at 4%. His monthly payment was about $1,300. This was a self-reported Reddit case, not an audited financial statement, so it is an example rather than market proof. The larger data sets are what make the story worth paying attention to. Edmunds reported that 6% of trade-ins toward new vehicle purchases had negative equity in the second quarter of 2026. The average amount underwater was $6,884. That is almost 3 out of every 10 trade-ins in that specific new vehicle group. The strange part is that the car can leave your life long before the debt tied to it does. Picture a normal SUV instead of a dramatic Mercedes story. You still owe $32,000, and the dealer says the SUV is worth $25,000 as a trade. The lender still wants the full $32,000, so the deal is sitting on a $7,000 shortage. You can cover that shortage with cash and end the problem right there. Most people replacing a car are not excited about writing a $7,000 check before buying the next one. For a lot of buyers, rolling that shortage into the next loan feels much easier than bringing cash. Now suppose the replacement vehicle costs $40,000. Before taxes, fees, warranties, or anything else, the new financing can already be around $47,000. The new car did not create that extra $7,000. The old one did. Once that old balance lands in the next contract, negative equity stops being a definition and becomes a monthly expense. The dealer may genuinely pay off the old lender, but the unpaid gap can still move into the next loan. The account changed, but the debt did not disappear. That sounds obvious once you see the numbers, yet the monthly payment conversation can make it surprisingly easy to miss. A lower payment feels concrete because people live on monthly cash flow. The amount financed feels distant, even when it is the number doing most of the damage. If the target payment is too high, the term can stretch, the down payment can change, or the trade structure can move around. The monthly number may improve while the borrower quietly commits future income for a much longer period. A payment can therefore make the deal look simpler than the balance sheet really is. A dealer can raise the trade allowance, lower the visible payment, and still leave the borrower with a larger amount financed. The pieces move together, so one attractive number does not tell you whether the transaction actually improved. A generous trade offer sounds like free money until you compare it with the payoff and the replacement price. If the dealer offers $27,000 for a car with a $32,000 payoff, the borrower is still $5,000 underwater. If the replacement vehicle also costs more than expected, the higher trade allowance may barely change the final balance. The amount financed deserves its own look before anybody signs. It is the number that remembers the old shortage after the showroom conversation has moved on. Monthly payment shopping is not foolish because households really do have monthly limits. The problem starts when the payment becomes the only number the buyer is allowed to emotionally react to. That framing is powerful because a monthly payment feels familiar, while a 5-figure amount financed feels distant. A buyer may notice a $40 change in payment and barely react to $5,000 of old debt hiding inside the contract. A car deal can feel cheaper even when the underlying obligation barely improved. The replacement vehicle also starts its financial life with baggage it did not create. Cars generally lose value as they age, while loan balances fall as principal gets repaid. Those two lines do not always move at the same speed. If the vehicle loses value faster than the balance falls, the owner stays underwater. That is not automatically a crisis if the owner plans to keep the car for years. time can eventually close the gap. Keeping the car can be boring, but every month gives the principal more time to catch the vehicle value. Keeping the car also avoids paying another round of taxes, fees, dealer spread, and transaction costs too soon. Trading early resets part of that clock because the next vehicle begins depreciating while the new loan starts near its highest balance. If old debt is added on top, the borrower starts the next cycle with even less room. Even a perfectly affordable car can become expensive if it is replaced too quickly. The problem is not always the vehicle. Sometimes the expensive habit is changing vehicles before the financing has had time to recover. The trouble starts when life asks for a change before the math catches up. A family grows, a job moves, insurance becomes painful, or the car simply stops fitting the household. Sometimes nothing dramatic happens at all. A payment that felt manageable in the showroom can feel ridiculous after 12 months of watching it hit the checking account. Now the owner wants out while the loan is still underwater. Selling the car is no longer just about finding a buyer. Somebody also has to cover the difference between the sale price and the payoff. Say the exact payoff is $36,000 and the best real offer is $29,000. That owner now has a $7,000 exit problem sitting in plain sight. Longer loan terms can keep that problem alive for longer. A longer term can lower the monthly payment, but it also slows the path toward a smaller balance. The CFPB says longer auto loans can reduce the payment while increasing total interest and the risk of negative equity. That makes payment first shopping especially dangerous when old debt is already inside the deal. The CFPB studied almost 34 million auto loan originations from 2018 through 2022. In that dataset, loans financing negative equity had an average term of 73 months. Their average loan-to-value ratio was 119, 3%. That number deserves a plain English translation. A loan-to-value ratio above 100% means the debt is larger than the vehicle securing it. At 119, 3%, the borrower is starting well underwater. Old negative equity is not the only thing that can push that ratio higher. Taxes, registrations, warranties, service products, small down payments, and other financed items can all increase the balance. Two people can therefore drive home in the same exact model with completely different financial positions. One may have cash down and positive equity from the trade. The other may have financed almost everything and carried several $1,000s from a previous vehicle. Same badge, very different exit cost. Three boring numbers matter more than most of the showroom conversation. You need the old loan payoff, the real trade value, and the amount financed on the new contract. Those numbers tell you whether the deal actually improved or merely rearranged the problem. A $40,000 vehicle with a $7,000 shortage does not feel like a $47,000 purchase when everyone talks in monthly payments. The amount financed remembers the whole transaction. If the old loan left a shortage, that shortage has to appear somewhere in the new paperwork. A lower payment can hide it for a while, but the payoff balance will eventually tell the truth. It remembers the replacement car, the old shortage, and every other financed item that joined the contract. Once old debt enters a new loan, it can survive more than one trade. Someone rolls $5,000 into car number 2 and decides 2 years later that the second car needs to go. If car number 2 is also underwater, the same choice appears again. Bring cash, wait longer, or push the shortage forward. Do that repeatedly, and car number 3 can still be carrying part of car number 1. At that point, the borrower is financing more than transportation. The loan is carrying the history of the driveway. Nothing on the outside has to look chaotic. The borrower can have decent credit, make every payment on time, and keep receiving approvals. Credit approval answers whether the lender thinks the borrower can make the required payments. It does not answer whether the payment leaves enough room for everything else in the household. A lender and a household are measuring different things. A good credit score can apparently help you make an expensive decision more efficiently. Current market data shows how much the extra leverage can cost. Edmund says buyers rolling negative equity into a new vehicle loan had an average monthly payment of $944 in Q2 2026. The overall average new vehicle payment was $777. The $167 monthly gap does not sound catastrophic by itself, which is exactly why it can be easy to normalize. Over time, though, that extra payment competes with savings, repairs, insurance, and every other bill that does not care what happened at the dealership. That is another $167 leaving the household every month. The interest gap is even more revealing. Edmunds projects $16,270 in average lifetime interest for buyers rolling negative equity into the next loan. The average new vehicle buyer was projected at $9,811. The old debt does not just occupy space inside the next loan. It can keep charging interest while it is there. Trading down does not automatically solve the problem either. Suppose you owe $30,000 on a vehicle worth $22,000 and decide to replace it with a $20,000 used car. The instinct makes sense because the replacement is cheaper, but the $8,000 shortage still exists. If that shortage follows you, the financed balance can already be around $28,000 before the rest of the transaction. The replacement car itself may only be worth about $20,000. You bought a cheaper car, but the balance did not shrink by the same amount. Trading down can still work when the full transaction really improves. Maybe the borrower covers the shortage in cash, gets a stronger private sale price, or chooses a much cheaper replacement. The useful question is whether the total financed obligation actually falls enough to change the household budget. Sticker price alone cannot answer that. Insurance can matter too, because the cheaper replacement may cost less to cover, fuel, or maintain. Those savings are real, but they should be measured against the new balance rather than assumed from the cheaper sticker. A trade down works when the whole household math improves, not when one line on the buyer's order gets smaller. That distinction sounds fussy until someone trades a $30,000 problem for a $28,000 problem and expects to feel free. The payoff gap tells you whether the old problem survived. Interest rates can create another false sense of safety. The Mazda borrower said his new loan carried a 4% rate. 4% can be excellent financing. It is still 4% on roughly $80,000. A low rate makes expensive debt cheaper. It does not make large debt small. That is how somebody can qualify cleanly, make every payment, and still feel trapped by the purchase. The lender may be right that the borrower can technically service the loan. The household may also be right that the payment leaves almost no room for anything else. The CFPB data shows another uncomfortable pattern. Consumers financing negative equity were more than twice as likely to have their loans assigned to repossession within 2 years. That comparison was against borrowers who traded vehicles with positive equity. Negative equity alone does not prove what caused the repossession, because the borrower groups differed in several other ways. But the pattern shows how often this financing appears alongside other forms of financial strain. Less breathing room makes every surprise harder to absorb. Some of today's negative equity can also be traced back to a very specific buying period. Edmunds says the average underwater trade-in in Q2 2026 was 4 years old. Count backward, and you land around 2022. The 2022 car market was anything but normal. Used and new vehicle prices had been pushed higher by supply shortages, and buyers had fewer cheap alternatives. Some people financed vehicles at prices that made sense only inside that unusual market. When inventories improved and values normalized, the loan did not reprice itself just because the market changed. The contract kept the original balance and schedule. That 4-year average age matters because it lines up with buyers returning from the 2022 market. A buyer who financed heavily near that peak could later watch the market normalize while the loan declined more slowly. The market value could reset in months, but the loan still followed the original amortization schedule. That mismatch is how a purchase that once looked normal can become an awkward trade-in several years later. You do not need a Lamborghini or a terrible credit score to get caught here. Edmunds listed ordinary popular trucks and SUVs among models with large average negative equity balances. That list included the Ford F-150, Chevrolet Silverado, Toyota Tundra, and GMC Sierra. Nothing about the vehicle itself has to be exotic for the sequence to go bad. Pay a high price, put little down, stretch the financing, trade early, and move the shortage forward. Each step can look manageable by itself. Together, they create a loan that gets harder to escape. Depreciation is not the surprising part because everyone already knows cars lose value. The real problem appears when you need an exit while the vehicle value and loan payoff are still far apart. At that point, the shortage has only a few places to go. Cash can absorb it, time can shrink it, a genuinely better transaction can reduce it, or another loan can carry it. The last option hurts the least on signing day. That immediate relief is exactly what makes the rollover tempting. Even repossession is not a clean delete button. CFPB guidance warns that borrowers can still owe money after a repossessed vehicle is sold. The car can disappear while a deficiency balance remains. So before any trade, the useful math is almost embarrassingly simple. Get the exact payoff from the lender and get a realistic value for the vehicle. Then compare those numbers before the replacement car starts distracting you. If the payoff is $31,884 and the vehicle is worth $25,000, the gap is $6,884. Once that number is visible, dealership language becomes much easier to translate. We can get you out of this car becomes a question about where the $6,884 went. We got you the payment you wanted becomes a question about the term and the amount financed. We paid off your trade becomes a question about whether that payoff came from value, cash, or new debt. These questions sound boring because they are basically accounting. Boring questions are underrated when the exciting version can cost 5 figures. The issue matters beyond one Reddit story because debt sits inside millions of household budgets. The New York Fed reported $685 trillion in U.S. auto loan balances at the end of Q1 2026. That makes auto debt one of the largest consumer credit categories outside housing. For many working households, the vehicle is also one of the biggest fixed monthly commitments after housing. A bad auto loan can crowd out savings, complicate a job change, and make the next vehicle harder to buy. Part of an old decision can still be sitting inside the current balance years later. The Mazda case makes that mechanism painfully easy to see. The owner said he was already considering selling the new vehicle and handling the remaining debt separately. He estimated that the leftover balance could still be roughly $25,000. He also said he already had another working car. That detail makes the problem look less like a car issue and more like a debt issue. The vehicle could be sold. The remaining balance would still need somewhere to go. A vehicle is worth what somebody will pay for it, while the loan is whatever the lender still expects. Those numbers can disagree for a surprisingly long time. When they do, the difference needs a home. It can come from cash, disappear slowly with time, or get pushed into another loan. What a dealer cannot do is erase the gap just because somebody took the keys. So before the next trade, ignore the paint color and the monthly payment for a minute. Find the payoff, find the real value, and look at the gap between them. That gap is the part of the old car that may be about to follow you home. The car can be gone tomorrow. The debt may not.